Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. I hope you're staying warm and enjoying the sunshine as much as you can. Thank you for joining us this morning on our fourth event in our monthly Child and Adolescent Professional Development Series. I'm Lori Kehoe, a member of the outreach team at SunCloud Health. SunCloud Health provides integrated, nuanced treatment with residential, PHP, IOP, and virtual services for adults 18 and up, and PHP and IOP levels of care for adolescents ages 12 to 17, focusing on the whole person, treating the whole person. And we are located in Naperville, Northbrook, and Lincoln Park. If you're interested in learning more about SunCloud services, my contact information will be included in the last slide for your reference. And to make a referral, you can contact me directly, or you can call our intake number that'll be listed on the last slide. Please note that in order to receive your CE credit today, you will need to remain on the Zoom for the entirety of the presentation. Also, you will receive an email, including a quiz and the survey. So please complete those two steps to receive your CE certificate by email. This morning, we have speakers. Melissa and Annie are both therapists at the Chicago Center for Evidence-Based Treatment, a private practice whose focus is on delivering evidence-based treatment to children, adolescents, and adults. CCEBT's team includes experts in the field of eating disorders, anxiety, and related disorders. Melissa Mello is the Director of Anxiety Services at CCEBT and a licensed marriage and family therapist. She specializes in evidence-based treatment of anxiety disorders, OCD, and eating disorders in children, teens, and young adults. Melissa completed her training at UC San Diego in research, multidisciplinary teams, and an intensive eating disorder program. She has been trained in and utilizes evidence-based treatments such as CBT, ERP, DBT, ACT, and family-based treatment for eating disorders. Our second speaker, Annie Schrayer, is a licensed clinical psychologist at CCEBT. Annie received her BA in psychology from the University of Michigan and her doctorate in clinical psychology at Roosevelt University, with a clinical focus in child and family psychology. She has worked at a therapeutic day school and completed her postdoctoral fellowship at the Depression and Anxiety Specialty Clinic of Chicago. Annie has been extensively trained in and utilizes a variety of evidence-based treatments in her work with children as young as 5, adolescents, and young adults. She is trained in CBT, ERP, ACT, and supportive parenting of anxious childhood emotions, acronym SPACE. And with further ado, I introduce you to our speakers this morning, Melissa and Annie.
Thank you so much, Lori, and hello, everyone. So we'll go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to be talking about supporting and identifying young people with anxiety disorders. And hopefully by the end, you'll be able to feel that you maybe received a little extra information on just being able to notice anxiety and perfectionism in different presentations in the school setting, or in other settings that you may be coming across children or students, and be able to go ahead and provide or recommend evidence-based treatment options for them and some tools. So I'm going to talk first about assessment of anxiety. And as we all know, anxiety and OCD and perfectionism can present pretty similarly, but it can be helpful to be able to tease the three apart. So we all experience anxiety or worry at times, and sometimes that can help us. And I think that's such a strength for all of us in helping young people who experience anxiety and worry, is that no matter what, you can relate on some level to what that might feel like, because again, it's an emotion that we all feel. And it also can help us, especially in the school setting. Imagine if a child or a young person never had any worry about their schoolwork. That would probably lead to no care in doing the actual work. So some amount of worry is helpful. And sometimes I'll talk to clients about the bell curve of the zone of optimal arousal or anxiety, that a medium amount of concern or care for their work actually allows them to perform the best. It's when we don't worry at all or don't care at all, or when worry or care is overwhelming, that it makes it difficult for us to focus and do our work. So we want to help kids or clients find that middle ground. And anxiety disorders and OCD, what we're looking for and talking about today, are lasting, intense, and impactful symptoms on important life areas. OCD is specific. It's an anxiety related disorder that involves intrusive thoughts and repetitive behaviors, and they're aimed at reducing stress or unwanted thoughts. So those internal experiences can look, instead of like thoughts, they can look like images. They don't have to actually be a specific thought. And then the behaviors can be internal, things that we cannot see, like private behaviors, such as having to think or tell themselves something or imagine something, or it could be something that's repetitive that we can't actually see, that's not a private behavior, it's outwardly apparent. Perfectionism is a little bit different than those two, and it's not a diagnosis, but it's something that shows up at school all the time, which is having extremely high standards and judging your self-worth based on achievement. And I'm sure all of you encounter that quite often these days. So I thought, I'm a pretty visual learner, so I thought I would throw kind of the common anxiety related disorders on a chart here so we could look at them all together. Sometimes that helps me to be able to differentiate when I'm working with someone. But generalized anxiety disorder typically shows up like excessive anxiety and worry about a variety of things. So they may have social worries, but they also worry about the future, like what's going to happen with their schoolwork, what's going to happen with family members or people that they care about, if they're going to be on time or not, just a variety of worries, not one specific type of worry. And it typically is pretty difficult to control, even though that they will try to control it, and is accompanied by symptoms like restlessness, fatigue, concentration's affected. A lot of times, especially as the child gets older, it'll show up as irritability or frustration with people, important people in their life, such as caregivers. And then it can show up in their bodies in ways like muscle tension or difficulty sleeping. And so something to look out for there would be just noticing that it might come up in a different, it might not be something where they express a worry to you. It might show up in other areas of their life. And then panic disorder is really apparent in their bodies. So often it's recurrent, unexpected panic attacks. And so it has to be followed by fearing that they will have another panic attack or changing their behavior to avoid another panic attack. And it can be as subtle as I always bring a water bottle with me everywhere I go because something about that feels safe. So it's good to ask questions about, are you doing anything that helps you not have a panic attack, or you think will prevent one? And you can learn a little bit more. Phobias can be a variety of different things, but they are an intense or persistent fear of one situation or object that is much, it's out of proportion. It's much greater than the actual risk. So a common one that I hear about a lot at school is phobia of vomiting. It also could be phobia of public speaking that might show up. You know, presentations might be really difficult, or that might be a part of their social anxiety disorders. So it depends. And there will be avoidance and distress in this situation with phobias. The last two are social anxiety disorder and OCD. I think these really impact kids at school. So social anxiety would look like marked fear or anxiety about one or more social situations. Usually it's about scrutiny by their peers. So, you know, people thinking that they look stupid or they are stupid, or people thinking that they're not, like that person is a loser or not cool, like those really judgmental, harsh worries, harsh judgments that they worry about. And then it's out of proportion to the actual threat of people feeling that way. And it's causing a lot of distress or avoidance. And then finally, we talked about OCD earlier. So obsessions, compulsions are both, and they either take a lot of time, cause significant distress, or both. So as your students are coming in, this is something you can think about in being able to tease apart what diagnosis they might be presenting with. And let me know if anybody has any questions as we go. Feel free to ask in the chat, and we can address them as we go or at the end, whatever feels best. So, some possible signs of anxiety and OCD at school are here broken apart by emotions, physical sensations, and actions. So, common emotions that you'll notice, of course, would be worry or fear, but it also can show up in a much more externalizing way, such as agitation, irritability, or acting out. So, a student with anxiety or OCD might be getting in trouble a lot at school for actions that don't align with the school rules or policies. Um, Often they'll seem distracted. So it could look like they have attention concerns, um, but it might just be that there are so many worries in their mind that they're not able to focus. And then intense indecisiveness can show up, having trouble deciding what to do or what to eat for lunch, what choice to make on a project to work on with a group. There's other forms of indecisiveness at school. Like I mentioned earlier, it can also show up in their bodies. So they might be really tired. They might fall asleep in class or seem really sleepy or fatigued. They might visit the nurse's office with a lot of physical complaints, especially the younger the child. Typically, there's more like somatization. So my stomach's hurting, or perhaps even I think I'm going to throw up. Um, Often it's GI concerns that will show up in the nurse's office with a child like this, but it also might be related to breathing or heart rate. So, like, I'm having chest pains or I can't breathe, that might show up as well. And then one that we see a lot in our practice, since we are really passionate about working on the overlap between eating and anxiety, is that we'll notice that children and teens are having trouble eating lunch with peers at school. So either they're afraid of what their peers might think of how they're eating or how they look with what they're eating, what the actual food is, like being judged, or it may be that their stomach feels uncomfortable and it's hard to eat, or afraid they're going to throw up. There's so many different reasons they might be having a hard time. And so it's good not to assume, but to check in on, notice you're not eating your lunch, or, you're sharing that you're really hungry at school. What's getting in the way of being able to eat enough. They might also ask to eat with a teacher, or they might be eating alone somewhere as well. That's something to look out for as well. Other actions that you might notice are missing school, certain classes or activities. There might be some intense procrastination going on as well. Schoolwork might change. So either the quality is going to stay the same, but maybe their parents might share that they're spending an excessive amount of time on their schoolwork, or the quality of work might decrease. I often notice it's just excessive amount of time is spent. And these kids are so hardworking that they're able to somehow keep the quality up for quite some time when they're feeling anxious. Other things you might notice is repetitive questions to teachers or counselors, like, am I going to be okay? Or is the test going to be hard? Or did I get that right? Or should I study more? What's going to be on the test? So just a lot of questions and meeting with teachers excessively. But just like with emotions, kids can present in pretty opposite ways. So one kid might ask a ton of questions and ask for help a lot and be at every teacher's time where they can help with homework, or other kids might totally avoid that and never ask for help and be slipping and struggling. And then finally, rigidity, needing things to be a certain way or giving up if things aren't just right. Perfectionism looks very similar, but some other things that I typically notice that I think are really big red flags are worries about measuring up to peers, like thinking about, what their GPA is versus mine, things like that. And then thoughts about making mistakes and failure. So if I make a mistake, I will fail. If they knew me at all, they wouldn't like me. If it's not perfect, why should I try? And these kids may have a lot of trouble with vulnerability and showing imperfection to others. They might procrastinate a lot or take on much, like way too much, have trouble with decisions, or spend way too much time planning and organizing before they get started. Trouble moving on. So this is, my clients will often, if they're struggling with perfectionism, go back to the teacher after tests where they've missed 2 questions and be asking, can I make this up? Or why did I get this wrong? Or, just really trying to perfect those last 2 questions that they didn't get right. And then unreasonably high standards for grades, college, extracurriculars, and friendships. The difficult thing about this is that I feel that in general, our culture is really trending towards unrealistic high expectations about grades in colleges, and it's not the teachers and counselors. It just seems like kids feel this intense pressure. So this one's a hard one that I think it's just important to ask more about and normalize that, yep, their peers are feeling that pressure to get into the school that has the lowest acceptance rate or not. That makes sense. And then finally, anxiety and eating at school, as I mentioned before, typically are really interrelated. So we just want to point out that it's important to look for and pay attention to, even if it's solely anxiety and the child does want to be eating enough and has no body image concerns. If they have anxiety, they are prone to the development of an eating disorder or weight loss. And that's really risky and concerning. So we really want to make sure that they eat enough food, especially because all of us cope better when we eat enough food. So working together with them to make sure that lunches happen at school in whatever way possible at first, and then working towards them happening in the way that they'd like it to, typically with their peers. And then individuals that do lose weight and have inadequate nutrition for other reasons can experience an increase in anxiety. So then this loop happens. And then often kids who have rituals as part of their OCD, they can be intertwined with eating and can make it much harder to recover from OCD and also to, meet developmental milestones or to be able to, healthfully grow. So something to really look out for and ask kids about to make sure that if they're having anxiety, I think an important question to ask is, how is eating going for you? Are you getting enough to eat? Are you eating throughout the day? How's lunch at school? And then finally, we're just referring to therapy. We wanted to share some questions to ask if you're having, thinking that might be helpful. Just wondering if worries are impacting their experience in important areas of their life, or even if they're functioning well, are they having intense distress? Some people look like they're fine, but are asking for more help. And that's a great time for a referral because they know themselves best. And then just talking to them a little bit about what it looks like to participate in sessions, that it's not just that hour a week, it's also being able to do the homework in between sessions, especially with anxiety. Have to practice every day. And if caregivers or support people are able to join, we always love that. I know common barriers that come up for all of us are that sometimes children aren't open to participating in therapy for so many reasons. Vulnerable, it's scary, it's a lot of work, they're overwhelmed, they don't know what to expect. Of course, a barrier could also be payment or being able to afford going to therapy. And so in those cases, where a child isn't open to it, there are parent-only referrals that Annie's going to talk about today, educating more and trying it as an experiment as well. If money is a barrier, I think that there are resources out there to help find more cost-effective therapy. You can always reach out to us and I can help you find a resource if that's helpful. But if the child seems anxious and isn't talking about anxiety with their parents or therapists, I think you all have such a, school counselors and social workers have such a great relationship with kids at school and get to see them in a setting where we don't. And so if you ever have any recommendations for us or the therapist that you're referring to, we always love to hear, hey, this is how this kid, gets more comfortable, or this is something they're really passionate about. Talk about that, or I go on walks with them. You could think about that. We'd love to hear those recommendations from your expertise. So please keep sharing that kind of stuff when you refer. I'm going to pass it off to Annie to talk about evidence-based treatment, but please, again, feel free to ask us any questions in the chat if you have any so far.
Yes, thank you, Melissa. Just to piggyback off of what Melissa was saying, during our intakes, one of our first questions is always like, what has the school said? What has the school counselor said? What has the school social worker said? Because often we are looking for that information 100% because you're with the kids, right, all the time. And we're not, and parents often have a different perspective on maybe some things that are going on. So the more collaboration information we have is just always better for the kid. And then we can, keep doing that. All right. So these are different evidence-based treatments for anxiety-related disorders that our practice does, but also that the general, cognitive behavioral realm of therapists provide. I do want to say, like, it's not your job to figure out which treatment the kid would need. That's on us. And Melissa and I, like, we do all of these. So that's not your role, but just so you guys know, if we're collaborating and we're saying some of these words or some of these acronyms, that you know what we're talking about. So CBT, and I'll go through all of these in more detail, but CBT, I'm sure, that's like a buzzword, right? Like it's a big overarching umbrella, and cognitive behavioral therapy is an overarching kind of theme, but there are specific components of CBT that are specific to anxiety related disorders. And then these other therapies, ACT, exposure and response prevention, and space, they're all kind of in that family, but CBT is also like its own standalone therapy as well. Okay, sorry, I just want to make sure the chat, okay, not for us. Okay, so CBT stands for cognitive behavioral therapy. It is often time sensitive, structured, present focus, in the sense of what is going on right now, what is getting in the way of the child. I'm going to say child, but this can be for all, clients. The child's functioning, both at school, both at home. How can we target the child's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and how do they interact? And how can we change some of the things that are happening and help them have agency in changing those things as well? So CBT can be applied for panic disorder. And oftentimes we're taking stuff from all of the different modalities, therapies that we're going to talk about. We might pull from multiple because kids, they don't fit into a neat little box, right? So we might have to pull from CBT and also from ACT and also from ERP, exposure response prevention. So CBT does apply to all, but so do other ones. So just if that's a question. So for panic disorder, we're looking at the thoughts and beliefs around panic symptoms and situations that could invoke panic, and how do we change those cognitions of approaching those situations. Social anxiety, we need to better define social goals, because often I'll hear a teenager say, well, I want to be popular. Well, what does that mean? What if they think I'm weird? What does that mean? Right? So helping them, I need to be funny. What does that mean? So helping them understand, okay, what are these goals that you are setting for yourself? And if there are these vague, ambiguous things, you're probably never going to meet them, right? Because they aren't clearly defined. So can we clearly define them? And then can we challenge these distortions around what it would be like to be rejected? How can we cope with that? And how can we still put ourselves into these situations and potentially open ourselves up for connection? Generalized anxiety disorder, like Melissa said, it could be around a plethora of situations and topics and whatnot. So using those overarching themes of, okay, how can we decrease worry time? How can we focus on overall relaxation skills? And then encouraging our clients to engage themselves in these situations that might trigger some of that anxiety, and then giving them the skills like, okay, no, but I can handle it. And then perfectionism, same thing. Like, we just want to understand, like, what does being perfect mean, right? Like, does that mean never getting a 99 on a test? Or so if you get a 99, you're automatically a failure, right? And exploring what that means about themselves and how they internalize that. And can we set more realistic goals, decrease rumination, and have some not just positive, but realistic self-talk that, like, yeah, you're probably not going to get an 100 every single time. And can I still be worthy, right? So all of that is kind of under the CBT umbrella. I see I want to ask you primarily talk therapies, or do you also integrate play therapies? Great question. I can answer that now. Me and Melissa might have different answers, because I do want to say that each therapist has different approaches, right? So I am not certified in play therapy. I am not a play therapist. However, working with kids as young as 5, I play all the time. And so I think that it's a balance of with a kid, right, who's 6 years old, who's coming in. I'm not going to sit down and be like, so what are your core fears, right? That's not going to get anywhere. They're going to be like, oh, like it's just that's not the information. So often with my younger kids, like we're coloring and talking, we're doing a puzzle and talking. We might be talking about specific movies or TV shows that they really like, and there might be a character that they love, and understanding what about that character that they love. Inside Out 1 and 2 has been a huge help in this of just like having a visual of emotions. Um, with my honestly, even with my teenagers, like I I used to work at a therapeutic day school, so like I would play catch all the time. We would go on walks, we would be playing Jenga, and we would write questions on the Jenga blocks, that's the word, blocks, and do it that way. So I think when you're working with kids, you have to integrate some sort of play connection to where they are developmentally, because it's not appropriate to do an adult intake with a kid. But I would not say that I am a play therapist. I don't know if that answer, and Melissa, I don't know if you would agree. Okay, yeah. Because Melissa also is a family therapist, so she might have a different answer. But I don't know if that answers that question, but if it doesn't, then please ask another one, or you can always email Melissa or I if you have more questions about that, or how to make something like more developmentally appropriate, because also doing something for a 5-year-old with a 14-year-old is not going to work, as you all know too. So just finding that sweet spot. Um, okay, another thing we use is ACT. So ACT stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. There are 6 core features of ACT: being in the present moment, values, committed action, self as context, diffusion, and acceptance. I'm not going to go through all of those things because that would take a long time, and they're still kind of vague, in some circumstances. But what we're always trying to promote is this idea of psychological flexibility, where we can see something that's happening, we can accept that it's happening, but that doesn't mean we have to do something with it. So a metaphor we use with that a lot is like tug of war, right? Like often, like, can we just like let go of the rope? That doesn't mean that the other side, those fears, those thoughts are not there. It's just we're not going to struggle with them anymore. We're going to acknowledge that they're there, and can we continue on? So that's ACT kind of in a nutshell. But focusing on just who's the person I want to be, how can I act in that way? And even if I have a thought, that thought doesn't mean that's who I am, that I get to be who I am. Yeah, I think that's good on ACT. Okay. Exposure with response prevention. So ERP is mainly seen in OCD, but also with school age kids, phobias, separation anxiety, any phobia of vomiting. We see that a lot. But it's the gold standard for OCD treatment, but it is with all phobia. Oh, panic disorder. We're using exposures all the time because exposures is literally exposing a child or a client to what they fear without engaging in these like safety behaviors. So let's say every time they go to school, they say to their parent before they get out of the car, okay, I love you. I'll see you right when you get here. Bye. And like they have to say that every time in order for them mentally to be like, okay, my parent isn't going to die while I'm at school. Right. And so what we would say is, okay, can we create a situation where we teach them skills first, and then we say, okay, you're going to get out of the car and you're not going to say that. And you're going to feel the feeling of anxiety, and you're going to see how that goes. With kids that are young, I mean, parents are almost always involved. And if schools are involved, that's even better because we want to do exposures daily. We want to do them consistently. And if we can do that with someone on the ground, that is like a huge help because we're always just trying to encourage the kid to how can they tolerate their anxiety? Because we know they can, and it's just often the fear of the anxiety. So it's creating situations where they can feel confident in their ability to do that. And yeah, and often with school age kids, school can be a huge trigger for some of these things, separation, certain rituals that they can't do at school, eating in front of people, not having their parent there, whatever it is. So this would be probably a pretty common thing that we would be collaborating on should we be working with a kid at school. And then space is something I do pretty frequently. So SPACE stands for Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions. And as I'm sure most of us know, we can't make anybody do anything. And often when parents get to us, they're kind of like, I want my kid to do this, I want my kid to do that. And it's kind of coming to that understanding of, well, we can't make your kid do anything. So this is a way to treat the childhood anxiety or OCD through supporting the parents in changing their behaviors. So, for example, if there is a kid who is, let's say they say to their mom, you have to drive this way to school so that everything's going to be okay today. And so the mom has just gotten used to, okay, I'm going to go 10 minutes out of my way every single day go driving a certain way to school because that eases the kid's anxiety. We would call that an accommodation, right? The mom is accommodating that kid's anxiety. And what we want to do is we want to support parents and saying, you know what, like you can handle your anxiety. I'm right here with you. And I'm not going to kind of do these accommodations over and over to manage your anxiety because I know you can manage it. So kids are not involved in space. It's only parents. And it is just teaching parents how to respond in a more supportive way and then reducing those accommodations that they've been making. Yeah, that's space. Yes, it is supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions. There is a website, and I believe it's called like spacetreatment.org. If you Google space treatment, it will come up. You can get certified in it, but if you have any questions, I'm always happy to answer a bunch of things about that. There's a book you can recommend for parents as well. And it's, like I said, it's all about like, instead of working with a 6-year-old on not feeling anxious, it's working with the parents of like, okay, well, what can we do, as the adults in the situation? Yeah.
You, Annie. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about some ideas for interventions. I know you all do such wonderful things already, and I'm likely there's a lot of things on here that you're already doing, but I'm hoping that maybe there might be a new idea or two that we could talk through that might be helpful to do in wherever you are with young people. So first, we're going to talk about interventions for school when it comes to young people bringing their thoughts to you. So I wanted to do a little disclaimer that cognitive interventions are going to be very different for OCD than they are for anxiety and perfectionism. So this is where the assessment piece I think is important, because if you recognize that the child is experiencing some OCD, you'll want to be careful not to be, of course, with all types of anxiety, we want to be careful not to be excessively reassuring our clients because we want them to sit with uncertainty. However, we really generally don't work with, for example, down here, evaluating the evidence for and against OCD thoughts or reframing obsessions to more realistic statements. It's just more effective instead of getting into the obsessions to actually be able to sit with the uncertainty and act anyway. That's a good skill for all anxiety, but in particular for OCD, I would not recommend these top interventions. So I just wanted to say that in advance. So if you identify that a young person is experiencing anxiety or perfectionism, being able to take a piece of paper and put a line down the middle and look at the evidence for and against the thought can be an effective strategy that's pretty quick and easy for them to take home. It doesn't take a lot of like explaining the skill. And it's something that can be done, I feel like, quick at school. If you only have, I know you all have so many things that you have to be doing in your capacity. So if you've got 5 minutes with a kid, that could be an intervention that I think would be helpful. And hopefully at the end, coming to a conclusion around not the thing I'm afraid of is not going to happen, but instead saying, hey, when I look at all of this, there's way more evidence against my thought than there is for. So maybe it's not true. Maybe I can run with that. Maybe I can like make some space for me to act like, maybe it's I failed my test, so why go back to class? And maybe it's like, that never failed a test before, even though that one felt really hard. And so maybe I can work with going back to class because I know now that it's not likely that that thought is true. Something else is probably true. Reframing thoughts, again, you can take that intervention and then come to a conclusion where you have a more realistic reframed thought. So the thought could be, it's not likely that I failed my test, but I don't know how I did. And maybe that thought allows them again to open up to being able to be more flexible and cope with their concerns. I also love, so those are both from CBT. I also love the ACT skill of diffusion. Again, it's quick intervention that you could teach somebody right away. I like thanking your mind for that thought. So just identifying like, oh, my brain's trying to help me here. Thanks, but no thanks. So like, again, if we're thinking about a test coming up and the child is thinking, I'm going to fail my test, they could say to their brain, thanks for trying to remind me that I care about this test, but no thanks. You're not helping me do any better. Like, thanks, but no thanks. Naming the story is also another helpful one, where, basically you're calling out your brain. Like, I know your story. I have your number already. So like, I don't really need to listen to that. So, you can have them like, if we gave a name to the story that your mind is telling you, what would the story be? And it could be like, hey, there's that story that I'm going to fail every test that I take. And then it feels a little bit more silly. Like, okay, there's a hole of doubt in there, that maybe it's not, maybe it's not so true after all. Maybe I don't have to run with what my thought is telling me. The nice thing about ACT is is that thought true or not? Is it helpful or not? So it's just like, you know what? I know that story already. You're not helping me. Passengers on the bus is a long one to explain, but I have a worksheet if anyone is interested, and I can send them. In a nutshell, you imagine, if you have a really visual kid, you can have them even like draw this. But it's imagining that you are driving the bus of your life down the road of hopefully your values, and you pick up passengers along the way, and their thoughts, your feelings, your physical sensations and memories, and they try to get you to go in all sorts of different directions. And it's being able to drive the bus, even though you hear all that noise, and go in the direction of your values. So again, I know that's a lot. I have a worksheet. If anyone wants to reach out, we would be happy to send you some resources on some of these skills. And then again, for OCD, those diffusion skills that I just stated are often the most helpful if we're going to work on that. And yeah, please just hopefully my email I'll make sure I give my email in the end. And then I will just email me and I'll send you the worksheet back. I'm going to pass it off to Annie, but I'll put my email in the chat.
Yeah, and there's also a video for the bus metaphor, and I will put a disclaimer, it is a very weird video. I don't know who made it. It's like 4.5 minutes. I would describe it as like Sims meets like Cyber Chase. If anyone watched that when they were growing up, like I loved Cyber Chase. And with British accents, like it's very, very weird, but it's the best one I've found. So we also have a video for that Melissa, you can attach to that as well. And I think it helps a lot it just puts a very vague concept into more concrete details. Okay, so for values, values are exactly what it sounds like. Like we want to help kids, and this is where like that developmental, like where they're at developmentally is really important, because we're not going to have the same type of conversation about values with a 16-year-old that we're going to have with a 6-year-old, right? So for a 6-year-old, it might be like, okay, like how do you know what type of friend do you want to be? Like, how do you know when your friends are being like a good friend to you? Like, what makes you feel happy, right? Like, what makes you feel good? Maybe a more specific situation. Whereas in a teenager, you can say like, okay, here's a list of values. And we have that also. It's called the ACT values card sort, I think is what it's called. And it's a bunch of values, and it's just identifying like what is most important to you. and then making a plan to do something that is aligned with those values. Um, when when we fall off the track, anyone, right? When we fall off and we're doing things and it doesn't feel right and we're not feeling good about ourselves, or we're not feeling like these are actions that we want to do, coming back to the values of being like, okay, this is the type of person that is important to us to be. This is how we want to be. What is something I can do right now, which also makes it tangible? What is something I can do right now that is aligned with some of these values, and making a plan, a concrete and achievable plan to do that. And then also recognizing like, okay, we might be struggling with one value, but there might be other values that we're really needing right now. We're really acting in accordance with, and making sure that we're praising that, because it's like, okay, this does, just because we're not doing this one thing right now doesn't mean we're a terrible person, right? It's okay if we're struggling in this area. How can we make a plan? And then the other ones, okay, great. Like we're actually feeling okay about that. So looking, kind of zooming out and looking at the whole picture as well. And then the next intervention is called mindfulness self-compassion. So mindfulness, think of, especially with kids, think of anything that is has to do with the senses, anything that grounds them. So um, anything with the five senses, right? With a younger kid, even a teenager too, you can use specific things. So, one thing I like to do is like I call it the rainbow game. It's looking around and seeing, okay, can I name something that's red, orange, yellow, green, going in order, and then maybe doing it again, and they have to find different things. Another thing is the five senses, naming five things they can hear, four things they can see, three things they can smell, two things they can touch, one thing they can taste in that moment, to just bring them back to the moment. It doesn't matter which sense you add to you assign to whatever number, the number it's just probably really hard to think of five things they can taste in the moment if they're not eating anything. So putting feet on the floor, you can have them put their hands on the floor. Anything that's just like bringing them back, a stress ball, right? Like anything that's bringing them back into their bodies in the moment. Breathing, something we teach kids is breathing in like as if they're smelling their favorite thing. You can have them think of whatever it is. I've had a kid say fresh bread. I've had a kid say like big chocolate chip cookies. I've had a kid say a hot pocket, whatever it is, and just getting them to breathe in and then blowing out like their birthday cake candles. And then self-compassion involves three components: mindfulness, kindness, and common humanity. So mindfulness is just recognizing this is tough. Okay, I'm here in this moment. This is hard. And then saying something kind to themselves like, this is hard. I can do it though, or I still deserve love. I still deserve support. And then also recognizing, okay, this doesn't make me weird. Other people like normalizing this. Like this is hard. This is a hard thing that we're dealing with. And you can have them give themselves a hug. You can have them, something I do a lot is, what would you say to your best friend or your sibling or your cousin or your dog, if they were feeling this way, like what would you say to them? Because it's often not as harsh as what they're saying to themselves. And then using that as a way to implement more positive self-talk and just like overall self-kindness, and self-compassion.
Yeah.
And then, sorry about that. And then behavioral intervention. So exposures, like I said, like when the outpatient therapists are doing exposures, it's very intentional where we're starting, what we're doing, what we're not doing at that moment, because we're not going to do everything all at once, right? So making sure you're collaborating with the outside therapist of because let's say it's a separation situation, right? We might have it set up that, okay, the mom is going to be 5 minutes late to pick up the kid. That's it, 5 minutes late. And maybe 15 minutes is like way too much right now. And it's not your job to know that, right? Unless we're collaborating, right? So making sure that we're on the same page, because what we don't want to do is have an exposure that's way too high for them on their list of like exposures, and then them freak out, right? We want it to be, okay, no, this is the appropriate level where they're feeling anxiety, but we know that they can handle it. So making sure that we're collaborating, because if we can do them at school, that is like the best ever. If we can do exposures at school, because they spend more time at school than they spend anywhere. Um, behavioral experiments of making a prediction about what's going to happen and circling back. Oh, you think you're gonna, you're gonna give this presentation and you're gonna uh, pass out and everyone's going to point at you and laugh at you and take videos of you and whatnot. Like, okay, that's your prediction. Let's see what happens. And then circling back because 9.5 times out of 10, that's not what happens. And just circling back, like, wow, okay, it wasn't as bad. That doesn't mean it was a walk in the park, but that doesn't mean, but how can we recognize, okay, maybe our anxiety is telling us a really scary story in our head. And then finding any opportunities to encourage the child to practice implementing skills because ultimately that builds their confidence. It's like two parts. It's yes, we want them to practice that skill, but we really want them to feel confident should this situation, should this feeling come up somewhere else, they know what to do and they feel like they know how to manage it. And school often is such a safe place for them to practice these things and grow their confidence.
Okay, I'm going to talk about reassurance seeking at school, as this is a common question I get, just how to respond when a child seeks reassurance from you. So it's asking repeatedly for you to kind of tell them something that would help them feel better in the short term. Because reassurance only helps children feel better in the short term, and in the long term, it actually usually makes them feel worse. We don't recommend in the long run responding with reassurance. So what I mean by that is, if a child says, is my mom going to be here to pick me up after school? And, you say yes over and over again, they feel better instantly as soon as you say it. But in the long run, they don't get to learn. They can sit with the uncertainty of what you might say or what might happen after school, or even learn, like, if my mom doesn't come pick me up, typically she would find someone else who could pick me up and all would be well. Like I could cope with that. So instead, once you have good rapport with the child, and hopefully, I would recommend they're working with a therapist on their anxiety or their OCD, so they have skills to actually tolerate what you're about to do, then I would let the child know that I wouldn't be giving reassurance and explain everyone experiences intrusive thoughts, or everyone in terms of anxiety, everyone experiences worry. But you're feeling like these thoughts are really meaningful, that they're going to happen for sure, and that you can't tolerate them. And I want to help you increase your tolerance to uncertainty or get you better at feeling. That would be like a teenager, what I would say. If they're much younger, I would say, like, your thoughts are trying to tell you that you can't handle this. And when I just answer right away, I send you that message too. I want you to know that you can be brave and you can handle this thought. Um, and the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to respond differently in the future. I really like to use humor in response, if we have that going between us. So, like, sometimes I'll just give them a look. Like, if they say, "Is that bad thing going to happen?" and I'll just kind of give them a look, and we'll kind of giggle together and move on. Or, and this is true, I'll say, "I wish I could answer that. I really wish I could give you that answer, but I'm not going to do it because of what we talked about." So I'll share them, like, I care about you and I would love to answer that, but because I really care, I'm not going to answer that question right now. When they are like a pro at exposures, you could do the maybe, maybe not response, which would be like, again, bringing in uncertainty. So, like, maybe she'll be here, maybe she'll not, maybe she won't. I don't know. And then that would be really difficult for them to tolerate. I only recommend that if you've talked with them, their therapist, and they're just like a pro at exposures at this point. They have to give permission. I don't want to subject them to more discomfort and uncertainty without the child's permission. So if I don't have that permission, I would just be saying, like, "Oh man, I wish I could tell you, like, I'm here to help you cope. We got this. I know you could cope either way." So you can always focus on coping. Like, I know you have the skills to handle that thought, or like, I'm right here with you to help you handle that thought. And then modeling, students will learn by watching you use skills, by watching you respond to really anxious, perfectionistic thoughts made by them. The more that you share unconditional care for who they are as a person, instead of their achievement, or whatever that they're worried about, the more that they're going to be able to see that in themselves. So it's wonderful that they're able to have you all as a resource wherever they are at school. And then finally, just wanted to share, as this comes up a lot too, that if students aren't able to eat enough at school, please do feel free to reach out to their parents, or their caregivers or important people in their life to determine if they need more help at school. And some treatment plans involve temporary support around eating. What that can look like is the child having someone in the background who generally has an eye on their eating while they're eating, and is available for help if needed. It could look like them going in and eating in an office where someone is available, like a nurse or a counselor, or social worker. It could look like parents driving to school and the kid getting in the car with parents and eating with them and then going back to school. There's so many different ways that we can do it depending on what your resources are and what the child's willing to do as well. And just didn't want to wrap up without saying that two things: family and community values impact anxiety. So, the way that we respond or we are responded to when mistakes happen in our lives impacts how we respond to ourselves. But also valuing things like appearance or discipline or being stoic, or achievement can impact anxiety as well. And it's never too late to examine those values with kids and ask them if they see them or where, and be able to shift them to different values, and saying like, what would you like to, how has this served us before, and how would you like to be acting instead? I also think it's really important to say that a lot of times kids will present with anxiety when actually they're experiencing the effects of racism or other effects of oppression or discrimination. And so always looking at the greater, relationship between the child and the systems that they're a part of is important, because we don't want to be evaluating the evidence for and against a thought that is coming from the fact that a child isn't safe, where they are emotionally or physically. And that's really hard and something that I have to keep working on every day. So always assess that if you can. And then we already talked about CCBT, but this is our general information. We love working with kids with anxiety, especially if it's impacting their health or their eating. Feel free to reach out if you ever need another referral or you want to see if we might be a good fit for clients. And then Annie is hopefully going to run another space group soon. So if you liked the idea of space, please reach out and we can let you know where we're at in forming our space group. I have resources here. I think these will go out, but again, reach out if you would like these, and let us know if you have any questions before we go. Thank you, everyone.
This has been so amazingly valuable. I feel like, and I think the audience would agree, we are taking away so many tools and information that we can use today. So thank you so much, Dr. Annie and Melissa. And we want to encourage you from SunCloud to utilize their services, Melissa and Dr. Annie and their team. As you can see, they're doing really effective work to help our kids. And the earlier we can intervene, the better. And SunCloud is here to support higher levels of care. So we look forward to hearing from you, the three of us, when you need to make a referral. And I just want to end with, Robert, if you can share the slide. We have a new CE series coming out in January, so we'll have 5 more speakers coming up, one each month. So just wanted you to be able to register for those as soon as possible and grab your spot. And we're just so grateful to our expert speakers today, and thank you for taking the time to share this with us. And we look forward to seeing all of you, and I look forward to touching base with all of you in the near future. And we wish all of you a happy holiday season, and thank you for all of the work that you do for our kids.